let's shoot some film. Forget about this digital stuff for a second. I know everybody's doing it, but you know, why not? Let's take a 4x5 camera out there and shoot some 4x5 Velvia 100 Fujifilm. Why not, right? So how's this gonna work? Well, what is it this is gonna look like? Let me show you here. In the end, after we shoot, you know, we'll end up producing images that look kind of like this, which will be 4x5 transparencies. I'm just holding them up here in front of a whiteboard just so you can kind of see. Here's another one here. This is one of my first studio product shots. Pretty basic looking stuff. But you can see and it ends up being this 4x5 transparency film. So the thing that we need to do is, in preparation for this, I need to load up these 4x5 film holders. You'll see here that I pull out the dark slide and I'm going to be loading film into this area. And if you can see this, there's this sort of like these little tracks down here, and I need to get the film in underneath those tracks carefully, without scratching it. The main thing is I'm going to need to be able to do this in the dark, so you won't even be able to see this happen on video because I got to do it in the dark. This is an exposed piece of film, just so you can kind of see, you know, what the film looks like prior to anything being photographed to it. So the main thing to consider is that you got to do this in the dark, because I can't open this box up in the light or else it'll ruin all of this film, and this film is $90 for 20 sheets. So I don't want to ruin that. So I got to do all of this in pitch dark, no light coming into the room at all. They make some of these like changing tent bags that you can do it into, which if you need to do this on location, I just choose to go into a completely dark room where there's no light leaking at all. Otherwise, it'll do this to your film. It'll render it exposed and it'll be blank. It'll go dark like this. There'll be nothing going on the film. Ruined. We don't want that. So do this in the dark. You can see here that there are these notches, and I need to get these notches into this lower, and for my purposes, it would be, when I'm doing this, the lower right-hand corner. So as I'm loading this in, I need to load the film in like so, if you guys can see that, and fit it in there, lock this down, and then get the dark slide back in, like so. And these dark slides are nice because one side is white, the other side is black, so you can kind of come up with your own color coding sort of system as far as, you know, for me, I would probably place it like so, there's these little dots, raised dots on the outside here too, and that will indicate to me that this is unexposed film, okay? And then after I've gotten this into the 4x5 camera, exposed my film, I can take it out and I can switch it around to the other side, like so. These are brand new, so they're kind of sticky. Get it in, and then it's black, the dots are on the inside, and then at least I know like what's going on with that. I can even take a pencil and write exposure information on the edge here, so that when I go to sit down and figure out how I'm gonna get it developed, I can put in specific boxes for developing the exposure information, depending upon if I'm looking to push or pull the process. Essentially what that means is pushing or pulling, they leave the transparency in the chemical bath for a longer amount of time or a shorter amount of time, which either increases or decreases contrast in the photo. So I'm gonna load these up. I've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I got 8 of these, so that's 16 photos that I can take, unless I want to bracket anything, in which then I would have less. I have to load all these up in the dark, and which you won't be able to see, and then we're gonna take it out in the field and shoot it. So here we are at Nine Pipes Wildlife Refuge, and I'm gonna shoot with this 4x5 camera. So check this thing out. It's got this bellows. We got the front standard here, which gives me a certain amount of tilt action, and should I need it, we're gonna come out here, we're gonna photograph the Mission Mountains. I'm gonna use this wide angle 75mm lens. It's mounted on this lens board. And so a few things I gotta do. I gotta get it into the camera here. Boop. And I gotta open up the lens to make sure that I can see through it. Let's see, some other things I'm gonna need are gonna be, I need a plunger. And so I attach that here. This is gonna trip my shutter. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of get that in the zone here somewhere, hanging out, ready for me. Let's see, what other things am I gonna need? I'm gonna need a light meter. So I've got this light meter here, and I'm gonna use the spot meter. It's a reflective meter in this, and I'm gonna be looking at this scene and looking for my medium gray tones in the scene. I'm gonna need this loop so I can get fine focus on the back of the camera. What you're seeing here is the back of the ground glass on the camera, and the image is upside down. So you guys, a camera is basically a dark box with a lens on it, and then putting a piece of film in the back and exposing that piece of film through this dark box. I mean, there's nothing in here, it's just air between the lens and where the film exposes. The distance here between these items, the front standard and the rear standard, that's what's controlling my focus on this camera. All right, so right now the camera is configured to get a portrait orientation photograph here. But I think I want to go in landscape mode since I'm photographing a landscape. And it's cool because I can hit this button on the side of the camera here, and I can rotate the back of the camera, which allows me to send my film in through the side, and now I have a rectangular composition that I'm looking through the lens with. So I don't know if you guys remember from the video studio, I had to load these up with film. So these are live, ready to go. Unexposed film. What I'm gonna end up doing is I'm gonna end up sliding this into the back of the camera, removing the dark slide and exposing the film, letting light travel through this lens, through the dark box onto the film plane, and then I put the dark slide back in, send the film out for processing. Okay, so you can see here, this is the information that I'm gonna need when I get in to expose this after I get my final meter reading of what exposure I'm gonna go with. This is my aperture here. It goes from f5.6 all the way over to f45 over on the other side. And then when I want to change my shutter, I move this dial here and that changes my shutter speed all the way from bulb 1 second all the way up to 500th of a second. A lot of you folks are familiar with an incident light meter. It has this incident dome that measures the light as it's falling onto the subject. For example, I'm standing out under this open sky right now. I could point this dome towards the open sky, take a reading, and it would tell me, based upon my ISO, what to set my camera at. And I can do the reciprocity from there to figure out shutter speed and aperture as far as faster shutter, slower shutter, more depth of field, less of depth of field, right? Problem is I'm standing in this darker area, but the mountains out there are much brighter. If you see how much brighter they are, there's no way that I'm going to be able to cross this lake with this dome and get this incident dome out into that lighting to see what the exposure is. However, this particular light meter, the Sekonic L508, and there's a number of them, has a spot meter in it, which is a reflective meter. And this is like a little mini telescope type device that allows me to look through it acts just like a reflective meter in the DSLR type or mirrorless cameras that you might be used to. And I'm able to take reflective readings off of different tones in the scene. The tone that I'm looking for out of this scene is gonna fall somewhere in that middle gray. So let's see here. The sky is about 15th at 32. The rocks are looking at about 1/8 of a second at 32. The green is 1/8 at 16 2/3. The dark part of the reflection, 1/8 at 16. 1/4 second at f32 is what I'm looking at here. I'm gonna set 1/4 second, f32, and I'm gonna get a sheet of film. Make sure that I'm closed down. I already checked my critical focus, so I'm gonna load this film into the back of the camera. I'm going to pull the dark slide. Sweet, that's this location. Let's see how this thing does with macro photography. So here we are in my backyard, and I've got now my field camera set up on a large tripod, something tall enough to be able to look down on my subject, which maybe you can see is just this red flower here. And I've got an 180 millimeter macro lens on the camera now. And what I need to do is the bellows extension. Previously, I'd been shooting some landscapes with a 75 millimeter lens. So the front standard and rear standard were real close to each other. So the wider lenses, you don't need so much of a draw on the bellows. But now that I've got this longer lens, 180 millimeter macro, in order to get this flower that's pretty close to me in focus, I'm gonna need a much longer bellows draw. At the bottom of this particular camera are a couple of knobs that allow me to unscrew and bring the rear standard back, extending the bellows. So let's do that. Now I'm gonna need to try to nail fine focus on this camera, which means I have to get the loop out and look through the ground glass. And because it's midday, it's still kind of bright out here, I'm gonna use this dark cloth over me. Probably you've seen this sort of thing in old photos of Ansel Adams and whatnot. All right, I'm going in. Good, I think I'm generally happy with that level of focus. I'm gonna have to watch the wind carefully. At this point, I'm in a good position to get a light meter reading. Okay, I'm shooting 100 speed film, ISO 100. I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of get some general readings, which is giving me about 15th at f11. Great, so because I have quite a bit of draw on this bellows, there's quite a bit of extension here. I actually have to take a tape measure and measure the distance between the lens and the film plane. Because there's going to be an exposure factor. I'm going to actually have to slow the shutter speed down a bit more. If I'm looking at 15th at f11 in here, I'm probably going to have to slow the shutter speed down a couple stops to account for the distance between the lens and the film plane. So let's go ahead and measure this out. So I've measured it, it's about 12 inches. I'm looking at 15th of a second at f11 on my flower. And I'm going to use my scale here. I'm using a 180 lens. So it gives me the conversion factors between the focal length that I'm at, my intended f-stop, and the difference between, on this scale, where I'm at and how much I'm going to have to, based upon how many inches of a draw I have. So I'm looking at a 12-inch draw. We're looking at about a stop and a third. And if I have to open up a stop and a third, I'm gonna call it 30th of a second, and I'm gonna go to f8 and 2/3. And that's when I'm gonna run some film. It's good. Welcome back, and welcome to the new studio. So it's been a minute since I've been on the channel. I thought I'd do this video about shooting with a 4x5 camera. Hope the beginning part was entertaining. Shot all that back in mid-July. It's about when I sent the film out as well. And about a month went by. I called the lab and they said, well, due to COVID, we're understaffed and it's gonna take a little longer than normal. Well, 4.5 months later, I finally got the film back. So here we are, end of December, almost into the new year. And I've got the film and I've scanned it. So what is this all about? You see, when I started out in photography, I started out shooting 4x5 camera. I wanted to do architectural work and product photography, and the 4x5 camera, technical cameras were really the tool for that type of work. And I had learned on film, and then I got out and began photo assisting right off the bat, and it was, I think I did 1 year there of photo assisting where we were still shooting with 4x5 cameras and roll film. And then things moved very quickly right into digital. So suffice to say, I've been shooting digitally probably for 18 years now, and it's been about that long since I have used a 4x5 camera. Right up to the day that you saw me out there at 9 Pipes, really. That was like back using a 4x5 camera. So that was a lot of fun. In this period of time, 4.5 months later, get my film back. I mean, you can see how long my hair has grown just waiting for this film. I feel like Rumpelstiltskin or something. But what is this video all about? Really, this isn't gonna be a side-by-side comparison of film versus digital. I think that there's some sort of process things to consider when you're considering like shooting film versus digital. But honestly, I feel like for most uses today of imagery, that really digital is right up there with film. So it's not really a, saying one is better than the other. That's not what this video is about. It's really about let's explore shooting film and what this is like. And what are the parts about it that I like and what are the parts about it that, not so much. So, to each their own, right? So let's take a look at these final shots. You can see here is the shot from 9 Pipes. And it's a nice shot, I was generally pleased with it. Film has this kind of quality about it where it feels like you can just kind of, when you're looking at a chrome like this, 4x5 large format film, it feels like you can just walk right into the scene. It's something I love about it. Here's the 100% view here. So, as far as image quality goes, it's really nice, especially when you can get a high-res scan of this type of film. And here is the shot from the backyard. Different kind of look, longer lens for sure, and wider open aperture. There was also some motion blur a little bit from the wind that was happening that day. And at that point, during these exposures, I was shooting with the light from the open sky, so there's much more of a blue cast over these. Here's the 100% view. So let me tell you what I like about this. I love shooting on a 4x5 camera. There's just something about the really quiet click of the shutter. There's something about the fact that it's just an empty box where you got a lens and film and that's it. And that's how you're creating these images.
So, there's nothing in here, it's just air.
There isn't a lot of electronics involved unless you're using like a light meter or another camera to get your exposure. The camera itself, there's nothing to fail on it really, as far as there's nothing electronic on it. And I love that. There's just a traditional aspect about that that's a lot of fun to work with, particularly when you can achieve shots on film that's very large and get scans of it, and it's just, the process of that is really beautiful. What I'm not that into is scanning film. Some people, I suppose, can get into that, but that part of the whole process to me starts to bog it down. You see, I have a dog and a cat, and luckily I scanned this film here at the school. But if I'd scanned it at home, I probably would have been dealing with a lot more potential, fur and dust and dander and whatnot. And even still, here at the school, I felt like I could have burned a whole half can of compressed air just trying to get all the dust, cleaning the glass, the process of the whole, thing of trying to minimize the dust, and even still have to take it into Photoshop and run dust and scratches or clone stamping. And you can see here, that the lab had actually use these little, when they hang the film up to dry, they, clamp it with these little alligator clamps, and you can see that's those little white specks in the upper right there, which it didn't please me how far into my image area they had clamped my film. So it was a little careless. I wasn't too stoked on that. So there's an enjoyment factor with shooting on a 4x5 camera in larger format type films. The fact that the image quality is going to be very high using this kind of camera system as compared to, say, a 35mm film, a much higher quality, and then just working with 4x5 cameras can be a lot of fun. And then, of course, that, traditional aspect of working with just lens and film, and that's it. Then the other thing we have to consider with this sort of thing is the cost. Okay, you've got the cost of the camera, you've got the cost of lenses, probably 1 or 2 lenses, depending upon what you're doing with it. And then you need a loop so you can look at the ground glass. You need a dark cloth to put over you in most situations. And then you'll need some film holders. And then you'll need some way to meter the film. So, there's quite a bit of little accessories that come along with the process of shooting with a 4x5 camera. And, that adds to the price tag overall. Of course, you can get a lot of stuff used nowadays, but it's just something to consider. And then there's the film cost. For this Fuji Velvia film, it was $5 per shot. It was like $90 and almost $100 for a box of 20. And that's pretty expensive. You want to make sure your exposure's dead on if you're going to be running a sheet of film, because you're spending $5 a sheet. Back in the day when film was cheaper, we would set up a shot and run probably 12 sheets of film on one single shot bracketing. Then we would take that bracket and separate it out into different film boxes. Then we would run that film to the lab with different processing times. We'd say, push this one half a stop, push this one 3/4 of a stop, push this one a full stop, pull this one half stop, pull this one 3/4 of a stop. And we run all this film, get it back, and decide from there, looking at it on a light table, which rendering of the contrast is most pleasing, and the one that we choose is how we're going to run the rest of the film. I remember learning about this many years ago when I assisted a fashion photographer, and this photographer, we were shooting 120 roll film with this Hasselblad, and he would do what's called a lead or a tail snip, where they'd snip from the lead or the tail of that roll a bit off of that first shot, knowing that the first or last shot would just be throwaways at that point. And they would do the same thing. They would run the tail snip or lead snip in the chemical bath of these different push and pull. And I remember asking, oh, what are you looking for here? And he would say, just to see if it's, one is better or not. So it's always this sort of like push, like how can we make things better? And I guess it's a mantra that stayed with me for, the past 18 years or so, where, I impress upon my students when we're looking at photographs, in a digital context of like, well, how can we make this better? What are we satisfied with the way things look right now on screen, or can we do things with the lighting or styling to improve upon it? So kind of like, how can we make this better? And with film, once you've shot the film, that's it. Your decisions about which film that you're using. After that, the decision is, well, how can we start to push or pull it in the process, in the chemical bath, to see if we can bring out or reduce contrast and change the film at that point. It was kind of at that point, beyond scanning and playing with it in Photoshop, the only other control that we really had. So it's, how can we make this better, right? So then we have developing costs, and for this it was about $6 a sheet. So we're talking $5 a sheet for the film, and then $6 to develop it. We're up to $11, not including the shipping, to get the box back to me. So it's a pretty pricey endeavor per photo. So you have to, it's almost like a game of, instead of shooting off tons and tons of shots and then choosing out of that and deleting the rest, digitally, you're aiming to achieve a really good exposure just with the one shot that you're shooting. So now we can talk about image quality. Sure, again, this isn't a comparison of digital versus film. A lot of this question, I think, really comes down to how big are you really trying to go? My digital camera is a Canon 5 DSR, and we're talking about 8,000 pixels on the long edge. I'm pretty satisfied with that level of resolution, and I can blow that up really big. It's kind of like, how big do you want to go, and also how close in do you want to view this work? There's artists like Gregory Crutzen who will, shoot their scenes on an 8x10 camera and drum scan that transparency film. And, maybe they're looking to have the viewer be closer to the artwork to see all that incredible detail that you can get out of that kind of a transparency and scanning situation. But I think, in most scenarios, people are expecting a certain amount of viewing distance measured off of the diagonal edge times 1.5 is kind of like, so they say. But, there's a certain distance that you're looking at this artwork. And so you have to kind of look at like, well, is my 5, 6, or 8,000 pixel wide digital file gonna be good enough? Most likely it probably will be good enough for that. So how big are you really trying to go? What is the process that you're comfortable with, being a part of to make that happen? And how close do you think your viewer is gonna be to the work? So there's also this question of the look of film. I've known some photographers who will be shooting like an ad campaign, and they'll be shooting the whole thing digitally with like medium format digital backs. But they'll go ahead and run some film on that same scene. So after they've shot that scene digitally, they'll pull out a film camera, connect their strobes, get the exposure, maybe run a Polaroid back in the day when you could get Polaroid, take a final look, and then run some film, really for the same idea of like, well, how can we make it better? They want to see how this same scene will look rendered on film, and maybe the film would be better. It's kind of like while you're there doing it, you might as well run some film and see how that looks. So there's that sort of question of the look as well. This idea of like, this big film on a light table feels like you can kind of just walk into these scenes. Again, that's also kind of the feel of like the look. And then of course there's technical considerations. Certain product photography scenarios will require the rear standard of the camera to be moved for swing or tilt or shift. And that's something that you can really only get with a technical camera. Any other perspective control lens, tilt shift lenses and stuff, your rear standard is fixed. That's your film plane or the digital sensor at that point. And you're not going to be able to make any changes to that. So in certain product photography scenarios, or even architectural photography scenarios, having control over the rear standard is very important. I would say less and less architectural photographers are using large format cameras these days, and certainly large format with digital backs, because then you're dealing with some amount of crop factor. But certainly I know product photographers who are using these types of technical cameras. And they're also using these technical cameras in conjunction with focus stacking along with it. So you're getting the maximum depth of field out of a macro situation. So those are some of the considerations that you would want to be looking at. So for me, I love 4x5. Well, I'm not so into scanning. These are all just concerns and considerations. You know, if you were looking at, say, picking up this kind of camera, you know, you're looking at the enjoyment factor, how you feel about that. You're looking at the traditional factor of shooting with just lens and film, and that's it. Dark box. But then you gotta weigh into that the cost. Camera, film developing, and then your time sitting scanning or spending the money on having somebody else scan it. Of course, when it comes to image quality, you know, there's plenty of videos out there where people do side-by-side comparisons. You can decide for yourself from those. I think it has more to do with the look of film versus the look of digital versus an image quality consideration these days. At this point, digital's there. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit the thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do. You can leave a comment down below. We'll get back to you. Subscribe there or there. Hit the bell. You know all that stuff. Thanks for watching.